In 1776, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, which said all men are created equal. But that was not true. It would be many years before blacks and whites in America had equal rights. Because of slavery, many Americans were not free and had no rights. Slaves were Africans that were forced to America to work on plantations and farms in the South. In 1787, the U.S. Constitution was written and it allowed slavery. In 1793, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act that made it illegal to help escaping slaves. In 1800, Africans in Philadelphia asked Congress to end slavery. Congress voted 85-1 against this request. In 1857, in the Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court declared that blacks were not citizens of the United States. The Civil War started in 1861. It was a war between the northern states and the southern states. The northern states wanted blacks to be free, and the southern states did not. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation that declared all slaves in the South were free. In 1865, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution abolished slavery. In 1868, the 14th Amendment guaranteed citizenship to all African Americans. Congress in 1875 passed the Civil Rights Act. It said all Americans were equal and had equal access to all public places. 8 years later, the Supreme Court said the Civil Rights Act was not constitutional. After slavery, the South created segregation, so African Americans were not allowed to use the same public facilities as whites, like water fountains, buses, schools, restaurants, and much more. In 1896, the Supreme Court said this was legal. During World War II, there was a big march in Washington, and black leaders asked for more jobs for African Americans. In 1947, President Harry Truman promised to end discrimination, but it continued. In 1954, the Supreme Court decided that segregation in public schools was illegal, and all Americans, black and white, had the right to attend the same schools. The next year in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat in a bus and go to the back where blacks were supposed to sit. She was arrested. This caused a protest led by Martin Luther King Jr. The buses were desegregated in 1956. In the following years, the civil rights movement expanded, and there were protests throughout the South. In 1963, civil rights protesters in Selma, Alabama, were attacked by Police Chief Bull Connor, who used police dogs and fire hoses to stop them. 3 months later, in August 1963, there was a march on Washington, a protest led by Martin Luther King Jr. at the Lincoln Memorial. There he gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. Because of all the protests, Congress acted, and in 1964 the Constitution was amended, so there would be no more poll tax, which had stopped poor black people from voting, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson. The next year, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act. Now, blacks and whites had equal rights, though there was still some discrimination, and the fight and all discrimination continues to this day.